Good afternoon, and welcome to IT Project Governance Strategies and Service Structures to Keep Your Organization on Track, a webinar tweet chat combo from Health Systems CIO, sponsored by TeamDynamix. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name's Anthony Guerra. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Health Systems CIO, and I will be your moderator today. We are having a simultaneous tweet chat hosted by Kate Gamble, our Managing Editor and Director of Social Media. You can participate in a separate browser or on your phone by using the hashtag HSCIOchat, or you can simply view the tweet chat in the Media Viewer panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll also be using the Q&A panel today, so if you have a question that occurs to you, type it in the Q&A box and submit it, and leave the default set to all panelists. We'll take those later in the program. And you could download the deck by using the URL on your screen. It's at the bottom of our slides, and it has been sent out in the chat box. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today, we're going to go 35 to 40 minutes with our main panel discussion featuring Frank Fear, CIO at Covenant Healthcare, and Andrew Graff, Chief Product Strategist with TeamDynamix. So without any further delay, we are going to jump right into our conversation. Frank, can you give us an overview of your organization and role?
Sure. Thank you, Anthony. My name's Frank Fear. As Anthony said, I'm the Chief Information Officer at Covenant Healthcare. We're located in Saginaw, Michigan. We are about 550-bed organization, close to 600 providers that support our organization, about 100,000 ER visits a year to kind of get a sense of our size, about 4,500 employees. Our primary system that supports the organization is a system called Epic. For folks that may be on the call and not in healthcare, Epic is an electronic medical record system that facilitates everything from registration, bill drop, to clinical documentation and the revenue cycle process. One thing that's I think maybe a little unique that'll tie into governance about Covenant is that we support more independent or affiliate organizations than we do employed employees and providers. What we've done is we've taken our Epic system and we've extended it to independent providers in the community. So although we have 4,500 employees, we have about 11,000 plus users that we support. That's about a 2-hour radius from the Saginaw region. So governance has a little bit different flavor when you look at supporting Covenant, as well as a large number of affiliate independent organizations that have their own priorities and goals and strategies. So it's a little bit about Covenant. Anthony, hopefully I covered some of the key points that people would be interested in about Covenant.
Yeah, just real quick, Frank, are the independent providers that you offer Epic to them, are they required to take it, or can they stay on what they're on and then you just have to integrate? Just real quick, a little bit about that. Yep.
So that's totally up to. They're not required to take it at all. They've chose Epic is one of the leading electronic medical record systems, and then the value of having a fully integrated record where when that patient's seen in the hospital setting or they have some sort of ancillary outpatient service, the data is seamlessly integrated in the electronic medical record. There's a lot of value to our independents and affiliates, and they've chosen to implement our Epic system. So that's some of the kind of the value proposition for them and why they've chosen to use our system, but it isn't required at all. It's been one of those things that's kind of organically grown with the value of an integrated EMR, electronic medical record.
Very good. Andrew, tell us a little bit about your role on TeamDynamix.
Sure. So to give you a little bit of background about TeamDynamix, we're a leading platform for service management and project portfolio management with a focus and presence in healthcare as well as the education market, state and local government. So all similar types of industries due to culture and some of the unique aspects of their customer base. And my role is really to listen to the market, determine what our opportunities are to innovate for that market and make sure that we're meeting the needs of the healthcare market with our product suite. And we work with Frank closely as a client, as Covenant Health is a key client of ours.
Very good. All right, Frank, IT project structure over at Covenant. You've got a lot of requests. You have fewer resources. then requests. Can't do them all. That's why IT governance is so important. And I've talked to lots of CIOs in different settings, and this is one of the top things, absolutely one of the top things that they need to master, so to speak, in order to have a life worth living. Is that is that a right way to describe it, Frank?
I think that is a good way to describe it. The desire is insatiable might be another way to position it. So let me talk about kind of the nuts and bolts of what we do at Covenant, and hopefully that'll have some value. And then I think I'll highlight a couple of key strategies to help us manage that demand. And the demand's a good thing, right? I mean, the demand means that we must be doing something right, and we're impacting different business lines across the organization in a positive way for that continued demand. The minute the demand goes away, I'm in trouble. So I think the demand's a positive thing. It's how do we manage that and do it in a team collaborative manner. And how, in the nuts and bolts, our governance structure, a lot of work has gone into it because it's really a critical piece in successfully working through demand and capacity management. We have committees set up that align with our various business lines. So in a hospital, for us, we have a physician office committee, ambulatory physician advisory committee. We have an inpatient physician committee. We have an ER committee, rev cycle, ERP, enterprise resource planning, payroll, finance, supply chain. And then inpatient clinical services, which is essentially inpatient nursing, and then our hospital outpatient department. So folks, you go out and you get an X-ray done, that will be in hospital outpatient department. Then we have a couple of, if you will, committees that aren't necessarily aligned with a business line, but they're basically support different functionality within IT. An example of that is our IT Security and Regulatory Compliance Committee, our BI Analytics Committee, Patient Experience, and then Tech Infrastructure. And what we've done that's, I think, listeners on the phone, is we position business leaders to be chairs of those committees, and then we take senior level analysts and pair them up with them. And when I say senior level, it's the folks that have developed a relationship, kind of know the pulse of the business that they're serving, and they have a relationship in a way that they can have a nice dialogue with that business leader outside of the committee meetings. The committees meet once a month, and then we have those chairs of those committees roll up to what we call an IT Clinical Advisory Committee that meets monthly. They look at decisions or projects across business lines, or if it's larger strategic decisions that need to be made, they'll pull together and meet. That's chaired by my CMIO, or Chief Medical Information Officer. He's a physician that is focused on supporting IT. And then quarterly, we have a executive level committee meeting that has basically VPs and senior VPs on it. And, a lot of the decision-making we push down to the subcommittees. So that quarterly meeting is more of executives. Here's what the committees have decided that with our capacity, what we should be working on. We give an update on major projects, budget, and get their input. But a lot of it is more, here's a recommendation, any further insight into that. We really try and drive that decision-making down. When a project request comes in, and this I kind of look at, hopefully this will be of value for folks on the line, on how we stratify and identify projects that align, with organizational goals. The first thing we do when a project request comes in TeamDynamix is we have an online tool that a person can enter that project request, is that we define it and categorize it between three key stratifications, and I think this has been really helpful for us. And this is actually Gartner, so I can't take a lot of credit for it, but we've really leveraged this. It's actually been used throughout the organization outside of IT. So we stratify it against, is it a run level initiative? Is it a grow level initiative, or is it a transformational level initiative? And when I say grow, think of stuff as basic supporting or improving our essential non-differentiating business functions. So someone might come forward and say, hey, I want a new phone system. That basically, our phone keeps the lights on. It's critical, right, Dial tone, when it works, no one cares. They basically say, hey, I expect it to work, but when it doesn't work, it becomes a problem. So RunLevel initiatives, we look at those as kind of those essential non-business differentiating functions. Grow, we define as enhancing, extending, or differentiating existing business capabilities, basically making us more efficient, improving quality, maybe improving the existing, the patient experience of an existing business line. And then transform. Transform are things that basically either create a new market, maybe displace or eliminate an existing service line. So a project request comes in and we put it in one of those three buckets. When we look at RunLevel initiatives and we look at the resources, and we talk about dollars and as well as human resources, a large percentage of our budget and our human resources needs to be focused on RunLevel initiatives. And I think that's critical for the listeners that I found, is that naturally I think the organization will push to do a lot of grow and transform, but you need to make sure that you have a healthy percentage. In our organization, we've said a minimum of 50% of our projects need to be run focused. And we look at that from both a capital budget standpoint as well as a resourcing standpoint. And when those RunLevel initiatives come in, we look at them from the lens when we prioritize in two ways. One is end of life, end of support. If it is, then we call it critical, and that oftentimes gets pushed forward. If it's regulatory in nature, healthcare is highly regulated, that usually puts it in the critical category. RunLevel things that might not be critical but are reduce risk substantially, we put as high. So we're looking at investing a tremendous amount of money in a more advanced disaster recovery site where we can flip over to a DR site and be able to go back 30 minutes to restore all our data. So if we get ransomware, we could quickly go back to 30 minutes. That's not critical. It's not end of life. It's not end of support. It's not regulatory. So we don't call it critical, but that is high for us, and we think that risk is legitimate. And then everything else that doesn't fit into those, we call those as kind of normal or low, and we categorize those in fields in TeamDynamix to manage those. Items that are considered grow or transform, again, grow, we have a higher, so if we have 50 to 60% of our initiatives that are run, we try and then put about 30% into grow and then a small percent in transform. And I just want to stress, you want to have a couple of transformational initiatives in your portfolio, and we talk about that and are intentional about it because, again, it's easy to have the run and grow completely consume your entire budget and resources. So we try and identify at least one transformational item and then grow. And what we do is we come up with a scoring methodology that aligns with our strategic plan, and we score each of our grow and transform items against that. For us, we kind of have four key pillars: patient experience, HCAP scores; quality is reducing readmissions; finance is margin; and patient experience is going to be our HCAPs, or patient satisfaction scores. And we get real about it. We say, is this really going to move? If it says it's going to move quality, it's got to move readmissions. And if we're thinking it's not, it's going to score lower. And we have conversations about that. That hey, it might seem great, and someone may think that this is the best thing since sliced bread. And it's going to solve a lot of problems in an area. But if it isn't going to really move a key strategic objective, then it really it doesn't have value based on what our board and our executive team has said. We also in that scoring methodology have three kind of risk scores that we identify. The first one is the scope of the implementation. Is it going to affect the department versus the enterprise? If something is going to affect the enterprise, that's going to have a higher score, right, or higher value. Two, the maturity of the technology we're evaluating. Is it really mature and going to likely deliver value? That might get a little higher score than something that isn't. And then we look at time of implementation. Is it going to take 6 months or a year and a half to implement that technology? So that's kind of, hopefully that was helpful and not too long-winded, but we look at it from run, grow, transform, RunLevel, look at kind of that critical high based on the criticality of it, and the end-of-life nature and the risk factors. Grow, transform, we score those against our strategic plan. The transform, we try and at least do one of those.
So Frank, if you covered a lot of stuff there, a lot of good stuff. If you were giving people just a simple list of here are some critical elements that your IT governance had better have. You mentioned committees. You mentioned lots and lots of committees. So there's always a question of too many committees, too few committees, not the right committees, right? You have to have the right committees. You mentioned committees that are not quite aligned with anything in particular, but are very important. So you've got that. You've got all the committees at one level. You've got the way you're divvying up the criteria or the designation for your projects, run, grow, transformational. You've got the tool of TeamDynamix that you're using here. But if you were giving people on the line like, hey, your IT governance had better have a few things, and here are maybe the 3 top things that you had better make sure are part of your governance, what would they be?
I think first, getting that run, grow, transform, whatever you want to call it, we call it run, grow, transform, stratification in place, and stress your organization. We need to invest a significant % of dollars in run, and for us, it's 50 to 60%. Because again, the national gravitational pull that I think you're going to find is people are going to want to invest all their dollars in grow and a little bit in transform potentially, and you're not going to have enough as an IT department to make sure you have the infrastructure in place to really deliver on the value of your grow and transform initiatives. 2, I would say, as you put your structure together, and we've aligned our committee structure with the various business lines. And that's been very successful for us, is that the business leaders not only chair those, but they feel like they have a key collaborative, kind of almost like an account manager relationship with IT that they can turn to and have conversations. Like I said, a lot of the conversations happen outside of the committee meeting. It's getting in the head of that business leader and understanding where they're taking their business, and then helping them navigate what are the IT options out there to improve their whatever metric or business value they're trying to achieve.
All right, very good. I want to jump to Andrew, bring him in here. Andrew, you mentioned you've got you're covering different industries, so that's interesting. I think we'll touch on that in a little bit. But when you're out there talking to prospects, specifically in healthcare for this question, what are they talking about? What are they saying they're struggling with specifically?
Sure. Well, I think Frank has certainly walked through a bunch of solutions to the pains that a lot of the healthcare providers we work with are experiencing. I think a couple things. There's generally chaos around the project governance process, and a lot of firefighting. What we see often is that the squeaky wheel is getting the grease, so whoever's making the loudest noises or most forcibly asserting their opinion about what should be worked on often gets the attention. But what happens typically is that the CIO is then still held accountable for ensuring that IT is executing on strategy and advancing the healthcare system's business. And so while it might, while doing projects based upon an ad hoc or what I'd call a chaotic governance process may be tenable, in the long term, it's typically what ends up costing CIOs their job, other than security breaches and just operational issues. But I think, when you talk about that chaos, it's critical to put some sort of governance structure in that's right-sized for the organization. I think Frank has done a very good job of finding a right-sized governance structure with the run, grow, transform construct, and then laying in general parameters around how much resource will we dedicate to each of these buckets. I think that's a fabulous structure. There are others. One of the things that I think is a challenge too is even when you have a structure in place, a lightweight structure, oftentimes we see a lack of buy-in. So I can't stress enough the criticality of actually gaining support of the executives that IT serves in that structure. I think the ideal situation, well, to frame it a little bit, every stakeholder, and we interview many of them, every stakeholder wants what they want for their department. So the challenge in this role is anyone who leaves a governance meeting, most often it's much like a product strategy meeting. We do the same thing from a product standpoint. everyone's going to be excited because some of the things that they're interested in or that will help them are going to be done, but then they're also going to be disappointed because not all the things they want to be done are going to be done. So gaining buy-in and having the executive team understand that, hey, I'm not always going to get what I want, but I understand why we make the decisions we make. I think that's critical, and doing the extra work to battle through with the executives, their concerns, et cetera, goes a really long way. And leading into my next point, all of that begs transparency. Executives want to understand, why did we decide to do something or not to do something? How does it align with the business? And we're finding that that helps a lot. And so, our products are built to support these processes. I also think that there are a lot of unreasonable expectations placed upon IT. Frank highlighted several, meaning everyone wants to spend all their money on grow and transform, and they don't necessarily want to understand or acknowledge the reality that, hey, we need to keep the lights on for this hospital system. And I think one of the key defense mechanisms that we often are providing to customers is a way to say, listen, these are all great projects. Here's what this does to your resource capacity. Right? Here's the sea of projects that we could do. Here are the ones that are least risky with the highest value to the organization, to be able to push back on those unreasonable expectations. The next thing that we see people struggling with is justifying hiring to meet all of these expanded demands. I mean, we've never seen a client where the executive team is at they have a lack of desires to push the business forward or ideas. It's all about resourcing. So what we try to do is give clients the ability to push back on those unreasonable demands, or to justify hiring, saying, hey, you know what, we're not going to be the bad guys here. These are all great projects, but do we have an additional $500,000 for contracting resources or to hire? Here's why we need them as well. I think the other main thing that we're seeing is that often there are varying levels of maturity necessary for governance and execution. And what I mean by that is that not all types of projects probably need the same level of rigor. And I will use a run, grow, transform example. And this is not a covenant example. It would be coincidental if it were. But, you might say for run, the projects, if they are over 80 hours of an individual's time or affect more than 2 departments, we have process A that we run those through. And that's maybe a 4-step governance process, pretty lightweight. The transform projects, if they're over $500,000, require an incredibly detailed business case, a 10-step process, committee review, et cetera. So being able to support different levels of governance we think is really important. One size doesn't fit all. And then from an execution standpoint, we're talking about intake, but when you actually get into managing projects, one of the challenges that we see in the market is that not all teams require the same tools, and not all teams have the same level of process needs or maturity around project management. So, when somebody says we're going to implement a tool, a project management platform, saying, hey, everyone's going to use this tool and it has a waterfall plan mechanism, that doesn't do well typically, because some people might be managing in Agile, some might be managing large waterfall, more traditional projects, and some might be more ad hoc. The challenge, I think, is gaining visibility into all of these from a leadership standpoint, because everyone has the right tools to do their job. And you're not force-fitting a low maturity team that doesn't need a whole lot of PM maturity into a tool that dictates a lot of maturity. That's just a recipe for failure, and that's a big challenge. These are some of the things that we try to address.
Very good. Very good. Thank you, Andrew. Frank, Andrew talked a little bit about people, the demand, people wanting things, and everybody wants what they want. Well, one of the things that happens that I'm sure you're very familiar with is when people can't get what they want through the normal channels, they figure out a way, unless you've got really sort of things in place to prevent them, they'd figure out a way to buy them anyway, or they bought them before you got there or before the governance process was in place. We call that gray, dark, shadow IT, all kinds of stuff going on in your shop that you don't really know about. So how do you deal with that? How do you combat it? Do you have certain structures in place? It's got to go through purchasing. Everything's got to be signed by you or by IT. How do you, number one, how do you figure out what's in your universe that it didn't go through proper channels? How do you deal with it to bring it sort of into the light, and how do you prevent that from happening going forward?
Well, I think it starts with what Andrew talked through this a little bit, and just kind of want to provide a little more detail behind it. It is, there isn't a one-size-fits-all project intake process. What we've done is, for items that we determine are smaller in size, maybe smaller in scope, size meaning dollar amount, but also IT resources to implement, we define as anything that's going to take less than 40 hours and affect less than 2 departments. They just go through a very straightforward, agile kind of change control, change management process where it's a little more organic with the connecting with that business leader or the business leaders that may be impacted. And we do more of a kind of a first in, first out. And if they start stacking up those requests, and we got to put them out in a future, using the agile terminology, a future sprint. If there's something that they find critical, we'll pull those leaders together and have a conversation and say, hey, we can reprioritize this item if you think it's critical, and then define something or grab something else and push it out. And that's worked well for us. So I think the quick win, the quick change type initiatives, you really need a separate process for that. If not, I think that will end up, there'll be so much overhead for things that really don't need that much, don't need that sort of rigor and risk of management and planning. All that overhead will result in people circumventing the process because they want to get things done. So I think that's really, really important that you have that kind of smaller size optimization request a process for that. For the kind of the shadow IT, you know what? I've embraced it. I look at it as there's more resources to help us with IT, and frankly, I can't get a lot of things done well without business operational people engaging that know the business well, that understand the workflows to help us with these implementations, as well as prioritizing of initiatives. So I try and embrace those folks, get them on our committees, give them, the ability if they want to be chair on committees, and really embrace them more as kind of informatics folks. In that, again, it's so valuable to have that gap filled where you have someone who has some IT knowledge, but maybe they have a little bit more knowledge on the side of the business and they know the workflows, and that's so valuable for us. So I've really embraced those folks, but having a efficient governance process, I think helps necessitate facilitate that effectively, where people can get some of the smaller stuff done quicker. I mean, the larger stuff, larger kind of projects that take months, 2 months, 3 months to complete or more. I think when I work with the business leaders and we talk through it, that there's an acknowledgement that we need to spend a little bit more time understanding what are we trying to solve, what are the metrics we're trying to achieve. We're a lean organization, and we use kind of the A3 methodology. So we kind of got a vernacular in our organization. We talk about, well, what's the reason for action? What's the current state? What's the future state? What are the key metrics that you would say would be success? So for those initiatives that are going to take some time to implement and maybe take some dollars, there is some support to kind of talk through that and having that dialogue with business leaders to really kind of press them a little bit around those key questions. What is the business value? What are you trying to achieve in this initiative, so that I know what I'm trying to design for you to deliver on that, the value proposition that. And sometimes business leaders need to think through that a little bit, and they define the kind of the urgency of it, but defining what success looks like is a great conversation to have, and it can lead all over the place and end up with a different design based on what they're defining as success.
And I'd add a couple items to that, and as I'm sharing thoughts and examples these are really coming from observing clients and clients who do things very well, and we've obviously observed the other side of that coin too. So really sharing experiences from a broad cross-section of institutions and organizations. I think one of the things we see most often is if the governance process is too heavy and that directors don't have enough leeway to do their operational work, you see a lot of projects being done under the radar. So one thing that we've seen clients do is always allow directors to allocate time, not just for keeping the lights on, but things that they want to do, that they think are important for their organization and operations. That usually makes them a lot more accepting of a larger governance process. Secondly, the other trick that we see is people managing changes that are really projects, because if it's a change, it doesn't necessarily have to go through the rigor. And what we've seen to be effective there is just as an executive team to determine what is it that you need to know about initiatives, whether it's a change or a project, and putting a framework around it so that you get the information you need. Maybe it's just we need to know what's going on. We need to know when it's supposed to start, when it's going to end, and a general status, red, yellow, green. Maybe that's the basic that you need for a small initiative, but you want to know that it's there, right? And as far as how the teams execute, I think as well, giving some leeway. So maybe you decide for anything under this threshold, we want to know the following three pieces of information: general description, the duration, and general health status. How you execute that, we don't care. Use a card wall, use a traditional project, use a change ticket. Doesn't matter to us at that level. That gives a little bit of flexibility, and that can help combat people's, desire to hide things. So just some thoughts based upon things we've seen in the industry.
Very good. Thank you, Andrew. All right, let's start with Frank on this question, and we'll get Andrew to jump in. How are you applying more structure to IT service management, and why was more structure needed, and what does adding more accomplish?
Well, we've really, tried to leverage the ITIL framework in our environment and use some of the key components of that. I think for us, with the structure that has really provided a lot of value is having full visibility across break fix and in the ITIL terminology incidents to service requests that turn into changes to project management, and being able to, as a leader, not only IT but business leaders, see what is going on, as Andrew said, what are the things that are currently being acted on in a dashboard format, and having just the right amount of information so that those leaders can look at that and have a good bearing on where things stand, where things may need some additional support, and where things may be off track. It's helped us internally get a better understanding of where our resources are being utilized, and as well as be able to communicate to the organization the value that we're delivering to them. Just simply seeing a dashboard that of the number of incidences and the number of changes that we've implemented, as well as we have on our dashboard the number of projects that have gone live so far this year. And then with that scoring methodology, be able to show which strategic pillars it's hitting on for some acknowledgement around that IT is delivering value across different areas. And then we've done a lot with our TeamDynamix tool around some key performance metrics that are more kind of customer service based. First contact resolution, customer survey results, service level agreements, all that, metrics that I think are pretty industry standard, to try and ensure that we're meeting some key metrics, and then where we see some opportunity to be able to drill into that and respond. So, for example, every morning I get a report emailed to me of any customer service surveys from the day before that were negative. and I can see a little description of the ticket and the ticket number, and can our leaders respond to that and do service recovery. Read a fascinating research article lately that said that if you perform service recovery and do it well, you're perceived better from the customer standpoint if the negative interaction or negative incident never even happened.
Wow.
I thought that was that was very interesting research that was done, that if you effectively do service recovery and say, I understand we made a mistake, here are the key things that we identified that caused it, and here's what we're doing to prevent it from happening in the future, and do that near real time or close to real time, your perception as a department will improve, again, higher than if the issue never happened at all. I think people expect that there's going to be issues that you need to respond to, and things aren't going to go perfectly in a fast-paced healthcare world where we're dealing with life and death situations at times. We sometimes miss the mark, but it's how we respond to that. And having a tool that helps me have that visibility across all of our different initiatives, and then have almost in real time the pulse of the customer and how they perceive us and be able to respond to that, has been transformational for our department and our ability to improve service. And it's been and it gives you a sense of from an IT leader, a little sense of more of control, because you got stuff coming at you 10 different ways, and how do you manage that? And it's beyond just projects, right? And having that structure and evolving that within that ITIL framework has been, for us, the structure has been needed for us to really continue to improve.
Andrew, you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. I think that the ITIL framework is a great place to start. I'm a big fan of implementing those frameworks and others like KCS, knowledge-centered service. And one of the reasons are several. It provides a good guideline for how to operate. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. The other thing is they're truly libraries, so it's one of those situations where you can select what you think is most valuable for your organization. It really is like a library where you're just pulling the books off the shelf you think are appropriate. You don't need to implement all of it. And I actually couldn't name a customer who has quote-unquote implemented ITIL, right? It's always pieces, parts. The other thing that it does is it provides people with a career path and advancement opportunities that doesn't require a lot of investment on your part. So I think that there are some morale and employee experience benefits, and then certainly benefits to how the organization operates, which in turn improves service levels to the customer.
Very good. Very good. All right. Before we go back to our next question, I just want to encourage the audience to go ahead and type in your questions. Hopefully you have some for this great panel, and we will get them before Andrew and Frank. So now to our next question, and let's talk a little bit more about the relationship between project management and service management. Do they need to be thought of in tandem? Andrew, let's start with you on this.
Well, they're inextricably linked. So if you think about providing service, right, any project you do is going to do one of a couple things. It's going to create a new service that you didn't offer before. It's going to replace an existing service, or it's going to enhance somehow a service that you currently provide. And so from a project standpoint, you're constantly developing services or improving them. And many times the requests that come in as a change request or a service request end up requiring a project. So there is a continuity there that's important to note. Additionally, as you are working on projects, many times the same people who have roles in projects also have some role in the operation of services, whether it be changes or Tier 3 support, et cetera. So all of that work that people are doing on both sides should probably be in one place for these individuals. That employee experience is really important, especially in today's hiring market. The other thing that happens is as you're executing projects, changes are required. You might find bugs that need to be fixed. So that the data or the work then flows out of the project realm back into service, so that they're very, very tightly coupled from my perspective.
Frank?
Yeah, I think to add on to that, I think it was very well said, Andrew. I think simply put, for me as a leader, I need to know what my capacity is, right? What are people working on, and what capacity do I have to take on more? And as Andrew talked about, service management, support, and projects all happen. I take one of my electronic medical record analysts who's working on physician orders. They're doing the service management, support, changes, and they're working on projects. And I need to be able to have visibility to understand what capacity they have with what they're working on now, to be able to project and plan for, and sit down with operational leaders and say, here's the availability of capacity, making sure that we have a percentage of time dedicated for break fix, a percentage of time dedicated to changes. There's smaller optimizations, and then here's the remaining that is available for projects. And how do you want to position that available time? Which project or projects do you want to do with that available time? And that's really important to be able to sit down with leadership and have that conversation with data. It doesn't need to be perfect data, but it needs to be data that you can sit down and have that conversation around. Here's the demand, here's a list of your requests, and here's the capacity I have. And it's tough, but to be able to understand that capacity, you have to have both the project management and service management side of it, and those resource utilizations to do that effectively.
Very good. Very good. All right, Andrew, let's go with you on this one. When it comes to IT service management, it is no doubt then that resource constraints are a primary challenge. What can organizations do to mitigate the drain on the IT group?
Yeah, there are a couple things. Number one, to Frank's earlier point, understand capacity so we're not overloading people, right? So we can push back on unreasonable expectations. And to his point, you're not reporting this data to the IRS, you're not going to get fined for it. It just needs to be directional. So, for example, the typical level of rigor, if you're managing me, you're going to say, I am allocating Andrew for 40% operational work, 10% to support, and the 50% of availability is going to be for project work, right? And then we say, on this initiative, this project, Andrew's going to spend about 10% of his time. So at least a directional understanding of availability. Second are processes to help reduce the load. And let me talk about a few of those. The first is self-service. It's a no-brainer. The cost of a request that comes into the organization once you get all the people involved and the time it takes is around $22 per service request or incident. It's $2 with self-service. That's a big deal. And so making content easily findable, so searchable. That content should be available on Google, right? You've got a very dynamic client base. You have doctors, you have patients, you have patients' families, none of whose job is to understand IT. It's much different than corporate. Make it easy to find your information so they can answer their own questions. We see clients reducing inbound call volume, and I'm including email and walk-ins, by over 70%. You could imagine what that does to free up your resources to really focus on high priority issues and quickly. So you no longer have a backlog you're wading through. You can get to them quickly. So one thing that really helps with this is knowledge-centered service. I mentioned that earlier. That is a fabulous framework. It's a framework that will help you continually generate knowledge that will answer more and more questions and improve how existing knowledge will help you answer questions. I won't dig into it. That warrants a lot of conversation on its own, but knowledge-centered service is, I think, fundamental to this, and it's another framework that's inexpensive to train your people on to help build a culture around and provide advancement opportunities. The other thing is that one platform, having people switch between multiple systems to figure out, A, what they need to do, and then to update their work. It consumes a tremendous amount of time. The next we'll mention is automating routings of work. So there's less triage. So as requests come in, the system should help you determine what team they should go to, how they should be routed, what workflows are relevant. That saves a tremendous amount of time, as well as automating responses and actions. So thinking about automation is a big deal. All of those can really drive down the burden on your resources and free them to more quickly address high priority items.
Anything you want to add there, Frank?
No, I think that covered it thoroughly.
Frank, before you got the TeamDynamix tool, how are you handling this type of work? Obviously, this tool has helped you, but how were you doing it before, and do you suspect a lot of people are doing it in that fashion?
Well, I'll speak to how we were doing it before, and it'll be interesting as we get questions that come in to see if any of this aligns with what people are experiencing. So, we had a separate project management tool we have a project management office that managed that and had to educate our department and the organization on how to use that tool. We had a separate Word document that people completed with project requests. We had a separate service management tool that was leveraged for, kind of help desk break fix type issues. It also facilitated our change control. So if you're you can imagine you're in our project management tool and there's a task to move a particular build into production, you'd in your project manager tool that task, and then you'd have to flip over to a separate tool and enter that change ticket and to track that move into prod. And that's I think in healthcare it's an absolute requirement by our auditors that we have very structured change control so that as things are requested and are built, that they're thoroughly tested, and then there's some sort of approval before going to prod. So we had we had Excel spreadsheets to try and communicate. Here's a list of project requests. Here's the total amount of resources to do each request. Here's our capacity to manage those requests. So probably 4 to 5 different tools with a lot of different processes and training the organization as well as the department on managing those was how we dealt with the different types of requests coming into IT and managing those.
Okay, so definitely a little more challenging in that past environment.
Absolutely.
Let's go with very good, Frank, thank you. Let's go with the Ask a Co-Panelist feature, which I always enjoy. Andrew, let's start with you. You have a question for Frank?
Yeah, sure. So I'm interested, 2 things, right? As far as the transformation that you've implemented around ITS and PPM, what has been most impactful looking back? And then as you look forward, what do you think the biggest impacts will be? What will make the biggest impact in the future of your ITSM and PPM process?
So probably some of the things that have had the biggest impact, and I'll use a couple of examples to hopefully bring it to light. I think it's having a really efficient, streamlined tool that allows our IT staff to be able to manage the different types of work, projects, changes, incident requests. But so that from an IT standpoint, that's had a huge impact positively on us. I think on the operation or business side, as requests come in, as I said, we score those against our strategic plan. It pumps out a score of 1 to 100. And in this last budgeting season, we had 88 plus requests that came in, and putting them into our system through a web-based form and scoring those, and then be able to sit down where I was in a capital budget meeting a few weeks back, and executive team member said, Frank, how do I know what the difference between a project that scored 31 and one that scored 33? And I said, what it means is that those projects don't have a lot of strategic value. When we look at a project that's a 31 or 32, it doesn't mean that we're going to use that score and exclusively use it to make decisions. But as an executive team, I want to make sure it's very clear to you, if we implement this particular request It's going to have minimal strategic value. Here's the strategic value it will deliver, but it's going to have minimal, and that we're going to be making the decision to go forward with that request based on some value that is outside what's defined in our strategic plan. And it was some great dialogue for us to basically look at those lower scoring items and say, you know what? Let's move them out. We have what's called an IT 3-year roadmap. A few years ago, I got rid of developing 30-page IT strategic plans, and it basically have a 3-year roadmap that lays out basically across that run, grow, transform stratification. And we push the projects out a year and say, hey, that has some value. Let's look in a future year. But let's really focus on these items that have the highest strategic value, and the score helps have that dialogue to find and identify those projects with the most value. That's probably some of the largest value propositions that we've seen in our current state. I think in the future, in looking ahead, I think we're all turning into digital businesses at some level, and this offends some of our clinicians a bit. But I kind of put it in the framework of, look at Tesla. Tesla is a digital business that builds cars. Apple is a digital business that delivers music. Amazon is a digital business that provides retail. And in healthcare, we're becoming more and more digital. We're a little behind the curve. You look at 10 years ago, 25% of the country was on electronic medical record with a number of initiatives. Now we're all electronic. What that means is every business leader across our organization, they may not fully acknowledge it, but they know they need to partner with IT to basically move their business forward because a lot of their process is built around it. So I think it's going to be continuing to evolve our governance, continue to evolve our ways to assess projects against strategic value in more of a dynamic, agile framework, moving away from projects and moving towards products where we're delivering products that have clear value, and we're focused more on what is the value we're delivering to the patient, and how do we define that and measure that. And as well as I think we're going to do a lot more items that may not be considered projects. There'll be smaller optimization types of initiatives and getting better at kind of agile design thinking, more of that small sprint, iterative testing, trialing. I'm starting to get more and more push to do transformational items. When you talk about transformational items, it's really hard to put down, well, how many hours is it going to take to do something that no one's ever done before? It's hard to project out that. Right?
Yeah.
So what you do is, some of the Agile framework where you're putting things in more of a complexity framework with story points and doing small sprints, pulling your head up out, and we're a lean organization, so we like to measure to see the metrics, measure the effectiveness, and get really good at saying no to things that aren't working out. That's going to be our next major evolution. Easy said, hard to do, but I think that's what we're going, and starting to do some of that now, but really, leveraging our tools to help facilitate that, because the tools and be able to measure that are fundamental. I think in healthcare, again, I think we're a little behind. We've finally got electronic. Analytics and data are starting to drive a lot more decision making, and it's only going to play a bigger role in how we implement and determine our IT initiatives effective.
Very good. Frank, did you have a question for Andrew?
Yeah, so Andrew, kind of with that framework of, our businesses are turning more digital, and the demand for our executives to see more transformational type initiatives, where do you see ITSM and the products that you develop and deliver, how do you see that supporting our ability to become more agile and more product-focused than project-focused?
So I see a couple things. The number one is I see, to your point about agility, not the agile framework. That's one way to improve agility, but agility, we see a move towards more freedom for teams to execute the way they want to while providing the analytics necessary for executives. So executives can set the direction, decide what needs to be done, but the teams have a little more flexibility in the tools or processes they use to achieve or support that agility, and that's something we're focused on. I also see improving how we serve clients and being able to increase the velocity with which we can provide more services. So that has to do with better experiences on both sides of the service relationship, meaning bot-based support. Right? We can quickly spin out content. Clients can find it without us needing to spoon feed that content to them. So as we change and transform, we should be able to broadly distribute answers to likely questions, and as we get the questions, answers to those questions more easily in different forms. So make it easier to find, really be able to present. We're looking at how do we continue to provide better answers to questions. Our goal is to have an answer for every question and a response for any request. And so I think automation on the back side of that is also going to continue to drive down the FTE impact of providing service. So your projects move more quickly, implement new services, transform services more easily on the project and PPM side, and then more easily integrate those and support those new processes and products in the institution by being able to better serve, providing knowledge, self-service, have that be a more fluid and efficient process.
All right, excellent conversation, excellent education today. Well, that's about all we had time for. Regarding continuing education, those of you who hold the CHIME CHCIO certification get 1 CEU for attending our webinars, so let CHIME know you were here, and if you've asked us to do so, we certainly will. You'll receive an email when the archive recording of this event has been posted to our YouTube channel. If you'd like us to produce a webinar on the topic of your choice, you can contact Nancy Wilcox from our team. You can go to our website to view our upcoming schedule of events. So with that, I very much want to thank our panel, Frank Fear and Andrew Graff. I want to thank TeamDynamix for sponsoring this event, and I want to thank you, our attendees, for joining us. And with that, everyone have a wonderful day. Thank you.